Hello and welcome to the Undermind, a podcast about AI development for StarCraft Brood War. I'm your host Shonko. I make computers do things. Let's begin. Hello and welcome everyone. This is the Undermind podcast, and here with me are my guests Nathan Roth, aka Antigua.
Yes, good morning.
Christian McRave.
Hello.
And Hannes Bradberg. I hope I said that correctly.
Yes, that is very much fine.
If no one has any objections, let's keep that speaking order. With that in mind, let's start with some introductions. Who are you? How did you get into this scene? Why are you doing it? Or why are you doing it? So, Nathan, would you mind saying a few words about yourself?
Sure, my name's Nathan Roth. I got into StarCraft by playing a little bit in WCG qualifiers, and then I was a StarCraft instructor for college courses through sc2gg.com. Done a lot of playing in different series and stuff at sort of semi-pro level. Have always been really interested in StarCraft. Noticed that there was a need for a Discord server, so I'm a Discord server admin for the SSC AIT community. And I also have a bot on ladder, and I'm working on the 2018 A Cherry Pie conversion for use on the general ladders at the moment.
What language do you code in?
I'm primarily a Python-based developer. I can dabble a little bit in the C land, but it's not my favorite.
Alright, McRave?
I got into the scene 2 years ago. I just joined, just never had any experience with coding. And then I just joined the IRC chat and eventually the Discord, Twitch chat. Just learned through coding, developing a bot I have on ladder, and competing in tournaments like CIG and AID. I'm 26 years old. I'm a controls engineer. It's really all about me. I code mostly in C++, and that's about it.
Yeah, you had quite the successes in the ladder, as I gathered.
Yeah, I've not been doing too bad, I guess. It's hard to compete with Samsung and Facebook, but we try.
Yeah. Hannes?
Well, I started about 20 months ago, so almost 2 years too. I started joining by watching on Twitch, and a few months later I had my own bot on the ladder. And since then I've mostly done things like libraries and working on BWAPI, the API we use to interface with the game itself, and not as much on my bot.
Yeah, I think we all know the feeling. So, I'm Lest, I'm Shonko. I have written my bachelor's thesis about StarCraft AI. Started just a year ago, and now I'm picking up the pace again because I graduated and finally I have some more time. I have a blog which will be this podcast posted to. It's makingcomputerdotings.com, and that's about enough of me. Oh well, I'm a filthy Java peasant, so I'm different than you, I guess. With that in mind, let's talk about bot development languages. As I saw, C++ seems to be the most popular. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, by far the most stuff is based in that. It's also probably the fastest as far as performance-wise.
That's a bold statement.
Yes. Really, at least in my opinion, the Java and Scala or Python or bots written in Go or other languages have historically not done very well, with a couple exceptions. Generally, the major ladder competitors are all, at least top 10 wise, C or C derivatives.
I'd like to mention our Lord and Savior Dan Gant's very fine bot Purple Wave, which is written in Scala.
Yes, I consult on Purple Wave. It's one of the main bots that I help with as far as competitive development. And unfortunately, while Purple Wave is an awesome bot, it is highly constrained in performance. Something like over 80% of its CPU time is spent just on talking to BW Mirror prior to the bot running on frame and initializing. So it's only got like 12% of its CPU resources or 15% to run itself. So it is highly constrained by the language it is written in, at least at this current time, until further tools are developed.
Yeah, about that I'd like to interject here because I'm slightly involved with the BW API 4G development. We are trying to make a better bridge for Java developers, and so far it seems to be working efficiently, at least more efficiently than the outdated BW mirror. And our future plans include updating the tutorial and on the ladder, and helping people set up bot development in Java in an out of box way, or at least more easily than it is now. And let's continue with MacRave on the subject.
I don't really have too much of an opinion on, I guess, the difference between using C++ or Java. I think, like as Nathan touched on, it purely just comes down to performance for me. I created mine in C++ because when I first started, I asked people what was the best option, and everyone said C++. So I don't have too much of an opinion on it. I hope that it continues in that direction, only because I feel like the C++ route, it's just a better idea. If we're already having performance problems with Java, why would we continue? Why would we continue in that direction, I guess?
Yeah, well, my opinion is the more languages we can provide to the community, the better. But that's just my 2 cents. Hannes, I know you have quite strong opinions on the matter.
Well, yes, of course I do. First of all, I'd just like to say that I myself work in C++, and it is my preferred language. But what I'm trying to highlight is that BW API is written in C++, and the performance bottlenecks you see in other languages are almost purely a communications bottleneck more than anything else. So when you see all the Java bots underperforming, they all have to use a very slow interface to call C++ functions under the hood, just to be able to do simple things like get the number of shields on a unit. Everything has to go through a C++ call. And so what I did, of course, is I wrote a native Java backend, which communicates with the BW API directly without going through a C++ client. And it had like half of the overhead as you would get out of BW Mirror.
Very much thank you for that. Do you think these delays or performance losses can be optimized away, or optimized away in like to an insignificant level?
Even at half, it's still a significant overhead, which is a little rough.
Alright, let's get to the next topic then. I think one of my thoughts is it's very hard to get developing a bot, even though the community is very supportive, either with actual help or stupid jokes. I think we have a supply of that, of both enough. What would you think? How would you do an elevator pitch on this scene to someone completely new to this?
I think the community in general is pretty darn supportive, and really in comparison to other AI development platforms, things are fairly well documented. And there's a lot of people who are very knowledgeable about the different areas. The Brood War development community is really fairly old. You're talking to a 10-year-old plus development group. And so there's a breadth of experience and history and many websites to help and things like that. Of course, There are some areas that hold us back a little bit, probably chief among them being support for remastered. I think in bringing new people into the community and having it be accessible, people just sort of assume that remastered would work with bots, but it does not, as we are limited to 1.16 until the UW API 5 work comes to a close. And I think that's really the primary bottleneck at this time.
I guess you're right in that matter. Even just getting the 1.60 version is not a trivial thing to do.
I don't worry about that too much. People who have a real desire and interest can get a 1.16 basic example bot to run in an afternoon. If you have any real programming background at all, I don't really think it's too bad.
What do you think? How experienced do you need to be to start with this? I mean, AI is not an easy topic. Let's be honest.
Not really that experienced. If it's something you can start dabbling with in your first course that you take on AI, or just programming at all, and go from there. There's been several people who have started, Fox, of course, among them, McRae, that really started with no experience, and they grow and you learn a lot, and it's a really great platform to learn programming in general and to practice your skills if you're a student.
Well, I guess starting is not hard, but writing both that wins a lot of games is. Alright, McRae, what are your opinions about that?
I think the big struggle that a lot of people are going to have coming into the Brood Wars AI scene is lack of, I guess, common knowledge amongst everyone. Like, maybe not super common knowledge, but for the most part, most of the Brood War programmers we know, for example, like Dragoons, you can't issue a command too soon after attacking, or else it cancels the attack. And stuff like refineries, the way they morph, and Renegade, just crazy circumstances, I guess, that the game engine has. I guess just weird interactions, like I don't know, carriers, like how to micro carriers properly, or the fact that there are certain bugs in the Brood War API, like before 4.2, you couldn't see enemy scans. They just didn't exist. I think those are the biggest struggles. Is purely just from an API perspective and just learning how orders work, latency frames, turn size, all that stuff's extremely difficult to work around if you don't know about them.
Well, for my personal experience, even finding them out sometimes hard. I mean, there are a lot of scattered tidbits on the internet, and like this unit morph charts, or basically any of the stuff you mentioned, and I don't think there is a good central repository or information where you can just learn all of these or most of these.
Yeah, I think it's a real struggle that we don't have some sort of central location for all this information.
Let's hope that will change in the future.
Well, yes. On the useful resources side of things, I think that the StarCraft AI wiki, I don't know if you guys know about it, actually has a decent amount of knowledge on the intricacies of the game and when you interface with it programmatically. And there's also the excellent Team Liquid post on latency frames for AI. And mainly it's about finding these, that is, being linked to them by other people in the community. And yeah, I have to agree. AI is mostly about finding out about weird things in Brood War and trying to write code that supports everything. And you basically need no previous programming knowledge, just the willingness to put in a lot of time into it.
Well, maybe it's just most beginners, I think, would give up after not having success for after weeks of programming. but that's just my impression. Alright, talked enough of this topic. Maybe another great consideration is lately on the ladder there are some bots, namely Seda and CherryPie appeared, that were not developed by enthusiastic community members or students, but rather large companies and a whole development team. Now, as you mentioned, competing against these bots are little difficult. Basically, what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts on team development in general.
Yeah, sure.
Well, it's a very different thing to develop like a team professionally. You have you probably have some kind of boss to report to. Hey, look at what we've done and everything. But in essence, they are doing pretty much the same thing as everyone else is doing. Just they have a lot more resources to put into it, and I don't really think it's a bad thing, because like they still contribute back to the community, and we can see what they do, and it's really impressive, to be honest. And it's also great for the viewers, I think, and I think it should be encouraged that more companies come and do StarCraft AI, but I can see the struggle of the individual bot developer trying to keep up with them. But I don't think it's an issue in general, but I don't think they should be looked as competitors. Like, I'd love to see a individual bot author tournament or something like that.
You think maybe we should have a separate ladder for team bots than individuals?
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea.
I think it's really interesting, and Haynes touched on a key point, is that all the corporate projects have participated in open source AI tournaments, meaning that the source code for what they have done is publicly available to look at, which is, I think, a great boon. It would be somewhat different if the large corporate projects didn't participate in any of the open source tournaments, and the code base that they produced wasn't used to later improve other bots and enhance features and things like that, and that the community couldn't learn from them. So they really are participating in the community and giving feedback. They've also, some of them have created tools. I saw a post today or yesterday that the head developer for SIDA, for the Samsung group, is looking to help with BW API 5 development, which is wonderful news. And the amount of work that they may be able to get done in a short time may be quite high. And of course, the Facebook group has been developing publicly available tools to test and do machine learning, and has been extraordinarily helpful to the community in that aspect. So really, they've been great community participants, and I've been very impressed with the decisions that they've made so far.
I have to agree. Christian, anything to add?
Yeah, I like to see that bigger companies are getting involved. It just brings more attention to the scene in general. For whatever reason that they want to come into the AI scene, that's their own choice. Whether they're trying to develop machine learning algorithms that they can apply elsewhere, it's indifferent to me. I kind of like Han's suggestion that there should be a separate ladder for companies like that, but once we get a couple more people that are involved in these group projects, and maybe we should be isolating them. One issue that we have still right now is the whole Locutus cloning issue, but I think that's a bigger issue right now that needs to be addressed at some point. But my general idea of these bigger companies coming in is, yeah, it's good.
Can you
just means there's more attention to the scene.
Can you elaborate on this Locutus problem for the audience who might be not familiar with this?
Yeah. There is a open source bot called Locutus. It combines Steamhammer, BWEM, which is a add-on made by Igor, the author of Iron. It's a map analysis tool, and uses BWEB, which is a tool that I made for building placement, and uses FAP made by Hans here. It was I guess he called it the Borg, where he combined a bunch of free-to-use libraries and foundations, and he built upon it and made a very strong bot. But unfortunately, it being open source meant that for the first tournament that we saw Locutus, there was already there's already one clone of him, so there was 2 Locutuses, and then in AIIDE there was 5. And if this trend keeps happening, people aren't going to bother making bots from scratch anymore, and you're going to slowly push the community away from even wanting to have students or, anyone attempting to make something serious, because they're going to have this huge hurdle of facing this clone war, basically.
Yeah, well, changing one line is not a new, but what are our other guests' thoughts on the matter?
He's done some work to change his license, so he's going to require that other authors that are based on him require permissions. That said, they can still fork from the aid version. However, my opinion is that, as a few months go by past a tournament, bots become not competitive in the top sector very quickly, and that a bot that's forked off of aid with Locutus's improvements for SSC AIT is likely not to be a top place contender, in my opinion. And so I don't think it'll be as much of an issue going forward with his new licensing, but we may still have some fragments of that going to the tournament, but by spring of next year, I don't see that being a continuing issue. It is good that bots are built upon the foundations of others. Locutus is a very good example of many different pieces being put into an awesome bot, and we want people to build on bots, but they need to make significant enough changes to where they justify a separate project.
Kind of hard to draw the line, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and it is nothing new. It's very familiar to the Steamhammer development. And Locutus is really a UAB Steamhammer plus all these extra tools, and so it's important to understand that most of the bots do not come from nowhere to suddenly become competitive. Most of them have multi-year histories of being built on other foundations and refined before they are finally competitive. There are some exceptions, Mr. Fox here being one of them, but that is unusual rather than common.
Yeah, but for some, as you said, for some parts are good. For example, many people have abandoned StarCraft AI development during the years, and this is a kind of a way to others to pick up the work. You mentioned briefly BW API 5. What I'm curious about, and you can do we know about in general, as did Blizzard take notice of this AI scene? Do they have any official stance on our little community?
Well, as far as I know, that they announced in a dev diary for StarCraft Remastered that they were going to support the API officially, or they didn't really announce it. They said that they were planning on working on it, but we haven't heard anything after that. I think not anything official, at least.
It would be obviously a big influx of new developers if that happened, I think. If they just announce it in a patch notes, that's millions of people.
It's hard because there is some stuff going on, but the ability to talk about any of that in a public fashion is non-existent. So there are people from Blizzard keeping a good eye on the community and watching very carefully what happens with BWAPI 5 development and listening to the conversations that are currently taking out. But yes.
All right, let's go on a little bit different topic. As I mentioned before, I wrote my bachelor thesis on or about StarCraft AI, and I noticed that I'm not alone with this. Well, this is a student StarCraft AI tournament, so it's not a very new thing to someone to do this. Do you think this is actual AI research, or more like just people having fun while doing their thesis or doing their main work?
Well, I really do think it's real AI work. Anything that can explore what's happening with like the next part of mastering AI and getting one step closer to general AI. I think we have to solve games first, because I think that would actually be a very approachable way to get closer to a general mindset and way of thinking. And if we can have fun while doing so, I think that's just a great thing.
Christian?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the matter? Is this real AI research what we are doing?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Okay, it depends. Like, if you are spending your time researching AI by making your bot really strong with a bunch of if statements and it plays StarCraft really well, you still are, even though that itself is not AI, you are pushing the level of competition up. And in doing so, you either require somebody to implement learning to predict you, or they themselves have to hard code rules and strategies to be better than you. And at some point, you're not going to be able to hard code anymore. You're no longer going to be able to just say, I have a rule for this, I've seen this before, I know exactly what happens, because people are going to start tricking you. Humans get crafty, they figure out ways of, putting down proxy buildings in specific locations. You're going to need to start figuring out how to check those. There's tons of maps that we play on that you're going to have to learn how all of those different strategies you have work better or worse on each of those maps. I think that this itself is AI, no matter what it is that you're working on it. And eventually we're going to be able to apply whatever we learn from StarCraft elsewhere. I think that's the main goal that a lot of these bigger companies that are getting into StarCraft AI, I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, well, the tricky thing is machine learning and AI, advanced AI concepts are not necessarily the best way to win, as we saw with Cherry Pie, who I think fifth or it's a top 10 bot, but were not first, not on the top of the ladder for some time. And I think Seda, the current top bot, or second, but in the top 3 in any case, is not it's kind of hard coded as well.
Yeah, it's purely hard coded. That they spend a lot of their effort just making a bunch of reactions and rules.
Nathan?
There's a lot to unpack there. The competitive environment doesn't exist independent of AI research. It's intrinsically part of that whole. So even a mid-level bot that is purely a set of if statements influences the others to make reactions and complex mechanisms to counter what they're doing, specifically if it is a rush or focus type strategy. And there's many varieties of this that are seen within the ladder. And the complexity level every year goes up. There's more and more machine learning, more training going on, more experimentation with algorithms. Seeing a lot of algorithm comparison of different types, like A-star versus JPS for pathing. And there's not a lot of environments where you can test a lot of that stuff, where you can take a set of 10 different algorithms that are designed to do a bunch of different things in a research environment, put them in sort of a real faux simulation environment like StarCraft is, and see the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches towards calculating the distance between points. With all of the fog of war and pathing and maps and units and all the stuff that happens in the middle there, and try and see how it turns out. And that is useful in using those tools to then later do other things. It's really an interesting test, and it's really fairly risk for companies. You know, they're not trying to deploy this algorithm they've created on a live system throughout the world. They can try it in a small environment and compare it to others, and really see how they do. And then you can also test their own AI research in their own teams to see how good they really are. You know, it's one thing to sit together at a table and write papers and discuss, you know, what the best route for using all this AI technology that we've created. And it's another thing to apply it to scenarios and see where it breaks down and where the weaknesses and strengths are, and test their development teams before using them for real or in combination with that.
I think there is a great point you touched on there. Tools for testing and benchmarking, and basically how good my bot does things. What do you think? What would you recommend? This is a question to everyone. What would you recommend to test your bot? What should you do?
Sorry, your question cut off. Could you say it again?
Oh, yes. So you touched on a great subject, which is testing and benchmarking your bot. What tools would you recommend? What tools, environments, anything would you recommend to a beginner to test their bot? How good is my bot? How can I answer this question?
Well, something that I did is that I integrated a bunch of Python scripts I wrote into my development environment. So whenever I make a change in my code, I can run a match and rerun a game with a specific seed, and just check if what I changed actually made a difference within a game.
Do you have some custom map sets and everything?
I have the SSCAIT maps, and I've written scripts and downloaded all the bots, and I have an environment and scripts to start up each bot in this environment, where I have shared BW data so that it takes up pretty much no disk space, and every bot has like snapshots, so I can go back to the learning state from the previous game if I wanted to play it the same way as it did the game before.
Seems to be useful. I think one of the hardest problem is just isolating a certain unit or building or something like that behavior, because yeah, well, it's a complex game and everything is interconnected.
I think people start off on the easy end. I think it's sort of a spectrum, right? So people, when they're new to bot development, you know, they load their bot in and they test versus the in-game AI on, say, one map, and then they learn to where they can beat that one, and then they do the other races in in-game AI. But they're doing one at a time, and that's sort of where people get started. And then sort of the mid-level thing is where you have a test environment, which is like a version of the ladder that you set up in SC Docker or something, and you can run large sets of games. Say, I wanted to test 200 games versus this opponent and see how it turns out. Right? And then you have past that, over on the more technical and complex side, you have the bots that can run on multiple machines. You know, like a bot like Cherry Pie, where you could run 10,000 games at once, right? Across the whole network of machines. And it supports those type of functions. So you have these different levels of sort of development, depending on where people are at in their project and what's appropriate for their bot at that time.
10,000 machines sounds very intimidating.
Well, with their bot, you just put a little dash in what machines and IP addresses you want, and it plays. So it's really, they've designed it well to have that functionality.
Yeah, but they basically developed a hive mind to defeat us. All right, let's discuss another topic. I had a great discussion, well, not me, I was just a participant in one of the topics, which was concerning cloaked units in the game, invisible units, and how they are handled. And someone brought the argument that, the cloaked units should be handled in a certain way to emulate the behavior in human games. Now, human games and bot games are clearly different. What do you think? Where should we draw the line? How should we form the rules for bots? What should be different and what should be the same? Let's start with Macrave, who's been silent for a while.
I don't really know how to answer that. Come back to me. I actually don't know how to answer that.
I surprised you. All right.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
You can't hide from Sanko, can you? So, I am not sure at all how to approach this question, just because, in one way, I really don't want AI to be limited by how a human works, because if a human always can see the entire map and can look at every single detail at all times, they can spot cloaked units instantly, which is also what the API does at the moment. It will tell the bot that, hey, there's an invisible unit here, you may want to detect it, and the bot will pretty much always instantly react to it. But I also don't see a point to be able to not be detected by AI instantly. But I'm not sure where it's a good thing to get a decent balance, because in one way, cloaked units will be totally underpowered if they are compared to human games, if they are instantly spotted, and in another way they would be overpowered if they can never be spotted by AI. And I don't think there's a good way to reach a point where cloaked units are about as balanced as in human games. I have no idea how that would be accomplished.
Well, cloaked units was just an example. In general, there are a lot of things that bots do differently.
Yeah, with the cloaked units, you've inadvertently, or I don't know, purposely stepped on a sort of controversial landmine.
Absolutely was on purpose.
On purpose. So, cloaked units are really a specific case that has had a lot of debate over the years. And it's actually one of the areas where the SC2 AI development group and the API on that side and the Broodware API fundamentally have disagreed. On the SC2 side, cloaked units are never visible in the API. So you don't see them until they attack, which has led to them being quite strong on the SC2 bot ladder, as you would think. And on the Broodware side, we've gone with the idea that they're visible essentially as soon as they pick a nose and derange, they're instantly visible. And so what happens is if you're using cloaked units against a bot, you just barely come into vision range and all the workers react and instantly run away. And you don't really catch any of them. Very and really, like Haynes has said, the right place is probably somewhere in the middle, but no one's been able to come up with a way that everyone agrees upon is correct in how to code it, that would be fair. And I don't really have a good answer there either. If there was a really good answer and several people could agree on what the really good answer was and had a really reasonable suggestion, I'm quite sure it would probably be implemented. But because it's an area that people have not been able to agree on, it's really hard to, without agreement, take a direction with the API, right? And so it is the way that it has been, and it will likely be that way unless there's some sort of agreement otherwise.
But there is no real central authority about BW API.
There's not, though there is community sort of consensus that occurs. if someone has a large objection to something that happens with an API, it will get debated and talked about and posted about on the GitHub. And generally speaking, if it's a fairly thing that's done, eventually it tends to get implemented. But when people aren't sure, that's sort of how it sits.
Another thing I saw was people time and again suggesting an APM limit for bots. Personally, I think that's the worst idea ever. What are your thoughts on that? Question to everyone.
But I do have an opinion now. At least an answer.
Let's hear it.
Okay. Bots being able to use enemy units orders. First of all, before we move on to your question, that is one thing that we've talked about in the past. So being able to see what a unit's actually going to be doing internally. So you can see, okay, this worker's moving to build, and you shouldn't be able to see that as a human, but bots can. So we can just start blocking people's buildings over and over and over and over. That is one thing that bots can do that we need to not allow them to do. But then how do we check orders for them attacking versus not attacking our worker, something like that?
Yes, because at the moment the API treats bots as superhumans. Basically, they have infinite APM. They can tell whatever a unit is doing just by looking at the active animation. You can see the cloaked units moving around, and that's at least the API is consistent with what it allows and how it treats the bots. But I don't really see how it would be done in any other way, because emulating humans, first of all, do we even want to make AIs like limited to how a human plays, and how would we even go about that?
I've had some pretty interesting discussions on this topic, and eventually what it revolves down to is eventually we want to be able to compare bots to professional level players, right? And to see where development is at, and what is the point where we have, like was done in the chess world, that game between the human and the finally decides it. And maybe this is a silly approach to take to, and maybe it should stay purely in the academic land of developing AI and that kind of thing. But everyone wants to see this happen. They want to see that contest settled at some point, some years from now. And in order to do that, I think that the API has to be at least fairly analogous to, at some level, what humans see, for it to be close to an even fight. The human may refuse to play it. And actually, if I was recommending to human that was a professional player that was invited at a tournament to play against a bot for a lot of money, for example, to kind of decide this contest a few years in the future, I would probably recommend that they only do so if certain rules are stipulated to the bot that limits them.
All right. And the goal somewhere along the line is to have games that are enjoyable by an audience, I think. There are a lot of potato games where nothing is happening for 10, 20 in-game minutes and basically just one shot there, one shot here, and that's not does not have any entertainment value. Yeah, and also an APM is a weird thing because you can just work around by having a lot of decision logic and not issuing orders anyway. Alright, you mentioned StarCraft 2. Do you play it? Do you develop for it?
I play StarCraft 2 a little bit casually, but I haven't played in probably about a year now. The API for it, the community is pretty small, if I remember right now, and their bots are also, I'm gonna put it blunt, they're terrible. There are 2 bots right now, I think, that dominate one of them is made by Tyr, or Tyre, however you want to say his name. I don't know how to say his name. Who used to be in the Brood War scene. The other one was made by TSC Moo, and that he said he spent like a week on it, I think, or like a couple days, and it just like it beats everyone. I am happy to see that they have an API and they have a community, but I don't know. I think we need to. I think maybe they need to have a bit of a bigger community. Maybe we need to help them out.
Yeah, I think it's Tyr after the Nordic god Tyr, but I'm not sure either.
Well, I haven't been in the StarCraft AI community. I've played the game for like 5 years after its release, but I kind of got tired of it and I went back to Brood War. And I haven't done any development in it just because I feel like the API is still really immature from looking at. I followed the project on GitHub and I always see breaking issues at the moment, and it looks like it's good that they have an API, but I still feel like it's not finished enough to actually warrant writing a bot in it yet.
I see a lot of interesting stuff with the AI2 development group. I actually think the community is larger and growing faster than the Brood War one. There's more raw numbers of people involved. Perhaps some of that's due to Blizzard support. There's also a couple corporate companies that are involved with sponsorship, and some of their tournaments are paying out higher dollar values. So there is more of an incentive on that side of things. That said, the Brood War AI development community is almost 10 years old now, and the StarCraft 2 one's less than 2. And the Brood War side, as far as bot technical ability and depth of strategy, the Brood War side is probably several years ahead. Though I think with the size of the StarCraft 2 AI development community and the amount of resources that are being poured into it, I expect that the StarCraft 2 AI development community will, as far as bot complexity and skill level in regards to a versus human level comparison, will probably equalize the Brood War community in about a year and a half to 2 years, is what I think. With their current development phase, which is faster, in my opinion, than the Brood War side.
I can see that. Alright, let's switch to a lighter topic. Do you have a favorite bot, favorite play style, or in general some funny stories you would like to mention about the things on the ladder? Let's start with McRave again, who has been silent for a while. I'm watching you.
My favorite bots are actually usually the ones that are really terrible, but I'm always a little bit interested by. One of my favorite is there's this cannon rush bot that all it does is contain you. It doesn't actually put cannons in your main, it just puts cannons at your choke and just makes a ton of them, then makes a bunch of gateways and spams zealots at you. I find those bots just a little bit more entertaining and a little, like, just that cheesy sort of stupid strategies than just seeing something like Sida, which is just like a 2 base, 5-6 factory attack move. It's like, congratulations, you can kill something. That's fantastic, but it doesn't look cool. What looks cool is when you see someone plant 30 cannons outside your choke and then make scouts and then kill you with scouts, like something stupid like that. So maybe my opinion's a little bit weird and wild that way, but I like seeing the cheese, I guess. Those are my favorite bots.
Yeah, well, not to mention nuking people, right, Hannes?
Yeah.
Well, yes, of course. Like, I mainly build bots just for fun, to be honest. And my biggest fear is basically someone like learning how to scan ghosts and stop nukes. That's terrifying.
You would consider just hanging up your laptop and live in the mountains after that point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like when I got that win versus Crazio, and basically the game after his bot started learning to keep his to make more science vessels, I was really sad.
So that's basically the Troll King bot.
I hope that that's what people think of me, but I'm not sure that I'm there yet. But if I'm not yet, I will make sure to get there.
That's a noble aspiration. Nathan, any opinions on the subject?
There's always a lot of stories that come out of the competitive seasons. A lot of stuff happens behind the scenes of trying to figure out who people trying to beat each other and what they're doing, and maybe they sandbag here and do this over there. Some of which you can't repeat on a podcast, but it's really very interesting. There's a lot of stories that come out of a competitive environment, and I think if there was someone who basically wanted to play the sports reporter role and treat it like a basketball tournament or something like that, and go around and interview the different authors and things like that, I think they'd have a lot of fun with it. Doing predictive brackets and things like that. It's a really interesting side to it. There's the really research-focused people, and then there's people who really sort of enjoy it almost like a sport, and really enjoy watching. And I'm kind of one of those people who does a little bit of both. To me, there's quite a bit of sport in it, as to who's winning and who's competitive and what's going on, and the development and who's working on this and that, and who's sharing information with who. And it's all really very interesting, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, next thing you know, there is an illegal gambling ring around the ladder.
I don't know if such a thing would even be, I don't know.
Sprite Club.
Yeah,
oh,
but
yeah.
but that's just play money.
I know, I'm just playing.
Alright. So yeah, let's talk about the weekly broadcast, which I enjoy very much. I think it's a meme how Nepeta, our great broadcaster, gets excited upon great mine hits or great storm hits at this point. Very few people have achieved meme status in this community.
I would love for a bot to add an Nebera announcer voice clips into their bot, and it's something I want to do, but when I asked him if I could do it, he said no, so I'm not really sure where I stand legally there, if I can do it anymore. But
Hey Hans, do you remember why I have a meme related to storms in the...
I do remember. Was it a compiler warning maybe?
Yeah, something like that, double to integer conversion. Yeah, that's my meme.
Alright, I think we are out of topics and the allotted time is almost up. So if you would like to say some closing statements in your defense or something, then now is the time.
I think I'm finished.
I'll try to be on this show as much as I can, but I usually don't have much time on weekends. I'm actually leaving in the next 10 minutes or so anyway.
Well,
So I'll try to be on as often as I can.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
Happy to help. And if you need me on, just let me know. And I guess the main thing I have to say is, there's only a few weeks left for SSC AIT, and good luck to everyone, and may the best bot win.
with that, thank you for being on the show, and I'm hoping this will be a regular thing. See you next time.